do is to So again, thank you, Mary, for inviting me. And I'm very happy to be here to talk about the United Nations. So what I have for you tonight is an introduction and overview of the United Nations. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but just to give you a flavor of it, then talk a little bit about Zonta's relationship with the United Nations and specifically our international service projects. Talk a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and how your club can be involved with the United Nations. And I welcome any questions as I go along, and also Donna, if I leave anything out, you be sure to let me know. Okay. Okay, let me see if I can advance this screen. Okay, there we go. So what is the United Nations? It's the big question that I get a lot of times, believe it or not. And it's basically an international organization founded in 1945. And Zonta has had an involvement with the United Nations since its start. In 1946 is when we started to become involved with the United Nations. And that was through our first international service project, which was the Action for World Peace. This was 1 year after the United Nations was chartered in 1945. And as you can see from the screen, the United Nations is made up of 193 member states. And the main organs of the United Nations are the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, or the ESOC, as we call it, the Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, and the UN Secretariat. Again, all were established in 1945 when the UN was founded. Today, the Secretary General of the United Nations is Mr. Antonio Guterres of Portugal, and he is the 9th occupant of this post, and he took office in January of 2017. In terms of Zonta's relationship with the United Nations, we hold roster level ESOC status. And again, ESOC is the Economic and Social Council that we've had with them since 1963. Today, Zonta International holds General Consultative ESOC status, which is the highest level afforded to an NGO, which stands for Non-Governmental Organization at the United Nations. So we are very well respected at the United Nations, and as a Zontian, you should be very, very proud of that. So why is this important to have this high-level general consultative status with the United Nations? Because it provides access to us, not only at the ESOC, the Economic and Social Council, but to many subsidiary bodies within the United Nations and different human rights mechanisms of the United Nations. Zonta International is one of over 6,000 NGOs in the UN community. I think there's 6,343 that represent civil society. So having this status is very important to us and very well respected. In terms of Zonta International and the teams that are involved with the UN, there are 5 UN teams, and our rich history with the United Nations helps us to develop these teams. We have the first team is in New York, which is the headquarters of the United Nations, and these are the individuals who are involved with the UN team in New York. Pamela Morgan is our chair. The second is in Geneva. And those are the people that are involved there. Then we have a UN team in Paris, another one in Vienna, and one in Bangkok. So in terms of Zonta's relationship with the United Nations, as I mentioned earlier, it's through our international service projects. And we stand out at the United Nations because of our size and reach, as well as our financial investments that we make to the welfare of women and girls worldwide through our international service projects. And this is just a quick overview of each of the projects and the financial investment that we have made within these projects. So, of course, we have the Adolescent Girls Health and Protection in Peru, which we are partnering with UNICEF for $1 million, and that benefits girls in South America. Let Us Learn Madagascar, which has been an international service project for a couple of bienniums now. And again, our partner is UNICEF with over $500,000 benefiting girls in Africa. The next project is strengthening the response to gender-based violence survivors in Papua New Guinea in Timor-Leste. And we partner with UNFPA for $1 million, and that benefits women and girls in Australia. And of course, everyone knows about Zonta's commitment to ending child marriage throughout the world, and especially here in the United States. And we partner with UNICEF and UNFPA for a total of $1.5 million. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of financial investment that Zonta makes to partner with the UN, which is one of the reasons why we're so respected, and we have a very broad reach within the United Nations. So next, I want to talk just a little bit about our involvement with the United Nations through the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but just in case. The Sustainable Development Goals are a collection of 17 interrelated objectives designed to serve as a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity, which sets the United Nations agenda through 2030. And as you know, as a Zontian, our current priority focus is on SDG number 5, gender equality, and the areas that relate to women's empowerment. Next, our involvement with the UN is in the Commission on the Status of Women, and it's sometimes referred to as the CSW. Zonta International has a very large presence at the annual Commission on the Status of Women, and we typically send a large delegation of Zontians to New York annually to attend sessions at the United Nations and to learn and discuss issues that are based on the theme of the year. Zontians are always encouraged to attend this important conference, which for the last couple of years have been hybrid. So there's no barrier to transportation or the cost of going to CSW, because a lot of the workshops are hybrid and you can attend for the entire session as many workshops as your schedule will allow. And this will help you better understand the global movement focused on women's empowerment and equality. And the CSW 68 for 2024 is going to be March 11th through the 22nd, 2024. And I'm particularly happy that this year our Zonta International Chair Pamela Morgan 3 weeks ago has been named to the to be co-chair of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women. So again, just another example of how well respected Zonta is within the community. The UN committee has several goals that we've been working on this biennium. The first one is to stand out for gender equality. Zonta International envisions a world in which women's rights are recognized as human rights. We accomplish this mission through service and advocacy. Our second goal is to represent global citizenship through the understanding of goodwill and peace, through fellowship of the Zonta clubs around the world who are charged to serve their communities, their nation, and the world. The third goal is to develop future leaders. Clubs and members strive to ensure that every woman has access to education and resources, and that more women are represented in decision-making positions. So I'm often asked how clubs can be involved with the United Nations, and I encourage club involvement all the time. Sometimes Zontians tend to stay local and they do great work within their communities, but we have a charge to let other people know that we're not just a local organization, we're international, and being involved with the UN is one way that you can show that to your different communities. So there are many, many different ways, and I encourage you to go on the Zonta International website, and there's a section for UN tools there under My Zonta, and you can find some information there that you can use. But I thought I'd give you a couple of suggestions. So the first is to participate in the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which runs from November 25th to December 10th. And there'll be a lot of information around the 16 days of activism coming out pretty soon. You can also attend NGO CSW meetings as a member of Zonta, and they're the third Thursday of each month. And if you go to ngocsw.org, you can find out information on how to register and when those meetings are happening. Again, you can attend the NGO CSW forum in New York. And if you go again to ngocsw.org, you can register. Right now, only the higher level agencies can register, but they'll be opening it up pretty soon for NGOs. The next way is to track the implementation of CEDAW, which is a convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women in your city, state, and in the US. And you can find out more about CEDAW at unwomen.org. And you can follow Generation Equality Forum by going to their website and seeing what they're all about and their relationship to the UN and to Zonta. And you can share information very simply with your community regarding the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG number 5, gender equality. So again, just a very quick high-level overview of the UN, and I hope that this gives you a little bit of taste for the UN and get you interested. And I would suggest going on the website of the UN, finding out more. I was not able to go to CSW last year. I have gone at least a couple of times and hoping to go in 2024. We will see, what happens, but it is an amazing event. And when I go, I always take the tour of the UN. Even though I've been on the tour several times, I always learn something new, and it really does give me the sort of the international flair of Zonta every time I go. So thank you very much. Mary?
I was wondering if you could share what the cost is for if you want to attend virtually.
The cost is absolutely free. You can attend and just register, and it's free to attend.
Thank you. That was a fabulous presentation. Thank you, Liz.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So no reason not to go to CSW.
Any questions for Liz?
Thank you
Liz, I
all for
hope you're
your
going to stay
attention. I
away,
appreciate it.
stay around for a little
I have
bit.
a question.
Yes,
I have a
definitely.
question.
Yeah.
Liz, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful presentation. I am just astounded by the depth and breadth of your knowledge of like the UN as an institution and Zonta and its connection and relationship with UN. That was really, I actually wasn't aware of that. So it was super illuminating for me.
Thank you, Nina.
What brought you into this work like for women and for the kind of the United Nations vision of what gender equality is?
Yeah, so I came to Zonta as a speaker, talking about my organization, Taylor for Success, and I was immediately impressed with the work, and I was particularly interested in the international aspect. Taylor for Success works when I was asked to speak there, we worked primarily with women who were in transition. We work with women and men now, but we had similar goals to advance women, so it was a really good fit. And I loved the international aspect from the beginning. And when I learned about Zonta's relationship and status within the United Nations, I was sold. So I drank the Kool-Aid really early.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And it's
And this
afforded me to learn so much more about what's going on, not only within Zonta, but around the world, and the different organizations that are working to advance women is amazing. And it's what keeps me in Zonta is that our focus is just on women. And a lot of the other organizations, they have other focus, but Zonta focus primarily on women, and that's always been important to me.
Great. So inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't wait to hear your presentation.
I just want to throw in one more plug, I guess, for CSW for all of you to go. That is really what got me involved so much more with Zonta, because you got to talk with women from around the world, and it just opened up so much I wasn't thinking about before, and different perspectives, and it's really a great opportunity. So thank you, Liz, for bringing that forward.
You're welcome. Thanks, Donna.
It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Nina Nedrebo. Nina is a 2010 graduate of Mount Holyoke College, and got involved with some folks that piqued her interest about Western Sahara. And she was able to go a couple of times to that location in Africa, and she's going to talk about that, what brought her to that, and what happened and where she's been since then. So I'm really delighted to welcome Nina. Thank you for being here.
Oh my goodness, it's such an honor. Thank you for having me, and just like really excited to be part of this, and alongside Miss Liz Hart. I just feel really, really honored. Thank you again for a wonderful presentation. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to be talking about life in exile as seen through the eyes of Sahrawi women and children. This is kind of the breakdown of my presentation. I'll start with some background, starting at Mount Holyoke and my time there, connections with refugee women, learning more about Sania, who she and I graduated the same year from Mount Holyoke, and then the story I learned through her about her grandmother and her ancestors, which is how I came to learn about the Western Sahara in the first place. And that eventually took me to the refugee camps of southwestern Algeria, in Tindouf specifically. And I will share a little bit. Most of my presentation will be about just kind of sharing their testimonies, and a little bit of what I learned from children too about their hopes and dreams for the future. So to start with the background, so I got involved with this, as mentioned, through meeting Sania and other women refugees. Mount Holyoke, while I studied there, we had a lot of international students, some of which were women refugees, and I had the privilege of getting to know some of them. One of them being Sania. Her name was Sadiqa, and another's name was Amila. Sania was originally from Western Sahara. She had grown up in a Sahrawi refugee camp in Algeria. Sadiqa was from Afghanistan, and Amila was from Bosnia-Herzegovina, but they had all in common that their peoples had experienced displacement. And so we ended up organizing a panel to present them and their stories. So I grew up in Norway. I'm a dual citizen of the United States and Norway. I had some difficult experiences myself. So with my family, I grew up in an abusive household, so I could relate to my peers and their people's traumatic experiences. And I think I was drawn to that with a sense of hope, of healing. I also found hope in my professors and friends at Mount Holyoke College, where I studied history and English. So just to start out, I felt like I wanted to start out with this quote because Sania's story was so powerful to me. I was taking, the way I learned more about her and her background was I was taking a class in English journalism, and we were supposed to write an article about a person or a story, and so I chose her because she and I had both studied in Norway, and we happened to live on the same dorm. This is from her, an article that she wrote. The night has just worn its black coat with bright stars. My grandmother and I sit on the cold, soft dunes of the Algerian desert. She points with her fingers to the wide sky and starts to explain the Sahrawi astronomy. Though she is utterly blind, she can still sense what once was a reality for her. She usually tells me stories at night. Some are fairy tales and others she considers real. However, on this night, she was about to tell me a different kind of story, a story that does not make me fall asleep, but one that wakes me up for the rest of my life. It is her story. And this is the time that her grandmother shared with her a story of their forced displacement, she and her family in 1975. I put a picture of John Milton's Paradise Lost in there because of the connection between, I was an English minor, and reading John Milton's Paradise Lost was a pivotal moment for me. But we also learned that John Milton was blind, and he had this vivid poetry in the same way that when I was hearing Sania talk about her grandmother's recollections of Western Sahara, it just was reminiscent of that. So I'm going to continue just saying a little bit more about Sania and her grandmother's story. The family's journey across the desert was marked by tragedy. The family wandered on foot. They slept during the day and ran at night so as not to be detected by Moroccan airplanes. Eventually, the traveling family became wary from lack of food and water. The youngest son, Brahim, who was a mere 8 months old, died of dehydration. Soon after, the next youngest fell to the same fate, Sania said. The third son died when he stepped on a landmine. The shrapnel and dust from an explosion also permanently blinded Sania's grandmother. Half of the family was gone. It was true devastation and heartbreaking, she told Sania once. And then I lost my sight. I'm sharing this picture of the the panel that we organized at Mount Holyoke with the 3 women that I mentioned, Sania, Sadiqa from Afghanistan, and then Amila from Bosnia-Herzegovina. So the panel meant to show these women and illuminate their stories. They spoke about their backgrounds and the struggle to obtain an education, citizenship, and recognition. I'll just highlight a couple of points about Sania because her background was just amazing. And it just shows a little bit about the conflict as well. I was lucky to find this. It's still online on GeoCities, but it's from back in 2008. Sania Abdurrahman, our first speaker, was born and spent her first 8 years in a refugee camp in South Algeria. She and her family have been displaced from their home country, Western Sahara, since the Moroccan and Mauritanian occupation of 1975. It talks a little bit about her time in Norway, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to conclude with the final sentence, which says, since then, she has been invited biannually to speak at the United Nations conventions in New York. So that was referring to the General Assemblies that happen every year in the fall and sort of winter. On behalf of the Western Sahrawi plea for independence from Morocco, which refugees consider to be the only solution to their displacement. Since we spoke about the UN, I'll briefly share every year at the United Nations. I've been there too to petition. The General Assembly has the Special Political and Decolonization Committee, which every year brings up the question of the Western Sahara, and a lot of people come from around the world to petition for a free and fair referendum, as well as the MINURSO, which is the UN peacekeeping mission in Western Sahara, for MINURSO to adopt a mandate to monitor the human rights in Western Sahara. And I believe that that's still not the case, that it does. So between 2010 and 2012, I embarked on research. I had support on a grant from Holyoke College to pursue historical research in the camps. Why I did this, I felt very strongly that the stories of women really attested to the longstanding plight of Sahrawis, from their forced journey across the Algerian desert to the present day life in the camps, as well as the occupation of their country. Refugees really see this history as vital to pass on to their children and grandchildren, because often internationally their voices, they struggle to have their voices heard. They know that with the passing of time, and we're now almost 50 years into the refugees' displacement, there's more need to keep safe the history. These recollections, I believe, express their hope of their return to their lost homeland. So now I'm going to dive into the Sahrawi women's testimonies that I was able to collect these testimonies, interviewing women. I had a translator, and I was able to record their testimonies with regard to what life was like as Bedouins. Today is Indigenous Peoples Day. So Bedouins really are nomadic peoples. And so the Sahrawis are ancestrally Bedouins. I also interviewed them about the forced displacement that they experienced, and then their life in exile and the hope that they have for the future. So just about Bedouin life and their recollections of Western Sahara, I really was left with a very strong impression of how important it is for women to recollect and talk about their lives in Western Sahara and as nomadic people. So Fatimatu, she was a woman I interviewed. She says, "We spent most of the time in the country, and after rain season, we sought the best place for the animals, which was important for where to move." I remember learning about how the people would go from one place to another to seek vegetation, because as nomadic people, they use the stars to guide them to move, to find, be able to have access to food and drink. And then Mbarka shares her vision of the valley of Wad Segwe in the Western Sahara. She says, "I was most impressed by the main and biggest landscape. It was close to Laayoune, and it was kind of like the branches of a tree. Sometimes when it rained and the water was left on the grass and trees, The valley colored them and made the landscape a beautiful color. Aza, another woman, remembers the ocean and the coast of the ocean. She was just months in Western Sahara before the invasion happened, and she recollects that she misses the land. I've lost that, and I was obliged immediately to go out from Western Sahara. She remembers a place really close to the frontier between Mauritania and Western Sahara. It was a long distance to the mountains, and when they came closer, it remained in sight a long distance. From one mountain to the other, you saw one of the mountains between. She loved the whole land, the entire homeland, saying it's impossible to focus on just a part of it. So here, the next part is a little bit more about the forced displacement, which I've shared in Sania's grandmother's story. I was lucky to be able to interview Asisa too, but I didn't include that here because I mentioned it earlier. But Adza remembers when the occupation happened, they looked from house to house after a list of Sahrawis. When they arrived and did not find someone, they broke glass and stole jewelry. One time, I remember they had knives and clashed them together and took clothes from the tent and ripped them apart to scare the women in the tent. They looked for the identification cards of us Sahrawis. One girl did not have an ID card, and another woman adopted her to say that she was not able to have that card when she was young. As Sahrawi people, we were scared. And Barka, another woman, after sharing perfumes in her small tent in the middle of the vast and sandy desert, expresses it's impossible to talk about this because it's a tragic past for us. The story about why our people fled. We were displaced from our country without reason and went out of Western Sahara to nowhere in a dangerous journey and under unstable circumstances. Sometimes we found someone to transport us, and sometimes we could go day and night, and daily we spent our time walking in the desert. We did not find anyone to give us food or drink, and this occupation followed us from bombing us to shooting at us with weapons and everywhere, to Tifariti and the border of Algeria. Fatimetu, this was really, I loved getting to this part because when I would ask questions about, okay, so what did the community do to rebuild? It was the the most amazing stories about how hospitals were built, schools were built, everybody was taking care of each other, getting children, even adopting children, taking care of babies that were born on the way across the desert. And she says, we considered this a strong work, a strong effort, that children could go to schools and that patients could go to hospitals. It's a really significant work here in Exile. Women suffered here, but she learned a lot from the suffering. She's the teacher, she's the mother, she is the nurse, she is the doctor. She is all these things together. These are very positive things for women and gives her occasion to be very strong, to be more liberated, and to be looking forward to a clear and bright future. So just to segue into the stories of children, I'll take us very briefly to Western Sahara. A couple of years after I had been in the refugee camps, I collected testimonies from children and youth there, as well as NGOs and human rights activists, focusing mostly on children and youth because I ended up sharing a lot of research with the UNICEF of Norway. But I was left with a very deep impression of how children, if they stand up to the Moroccan kingdom government there, which has daily presence around the occupied territories. Anybody that protests with a flag or organizes anything, there's an immediate crackdown. And this is a picture of that. Children would share how they had been imprisoned just for raising a flag or talking about an independent Western Sahara. They would be electrocuted in prison, abused, and they would also, there are torture prisons that exist in Rabat, which is Morocco. Families would be able to visit there and then see a prisoner whose, for example, nails had been removed, or they were clearly had been tortured while there. And so family would witness that when visiting, and have very short periods of time visiting. A lot of people to disappear. So these human rights abuses continue, and the UN still doesn't have a mandate to monitor the human rights there. So back to the refugee camps, children's hopes in education. While I was in the camps, I was able to interview children and learn about their hopes for the future. So they, children are really seeking education from good trained teachers, educational supplies, recreational opportunities at school, opportunities beyond middle school, which is where it stops in the camps. They're very concerned with being active in the community and also having a voice so civic and global citizenship is really at the heart of so much of how kids organize and youth organize there, and the human rights, especially of the people in their own homeland. And then a recognition of Western Sahara as well as what their and their ancestral homeland and their connection to it was very near and dear to their hearts. So the UNHCR Algeria provides protection and assistance to refugees and asylum seekers, and to Sahrawi refugees in the 5 camps near Tindouf. So they also work with UNICEF around education in the camps. Okay, back to today. I work as a teacher in Holyoke Public Schools. I'm in my 2nd year as a Teach for America Corps member. I've devoted my life now to raising my daughter. I'm the sole provider for her, so she's at the center of my life. And I also really have enjoyed the time teaching kids in Holyoke. Because of some of my experiences too, my own experiences growing up, and dealing with trauma, but also seeing it and hearing it from, for example, the children of Western Sahara who live in the occupied territories. I feel more sensitized to these experiences, but I really believe that the way to address that is to work together. No one can really do it alone. But when we do work together, we can do a lot for children, and bring more kindness and more hope into this world. And that concludes my presentation.
Great.
I'm happy to take any questions.
Nina, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Nina?
Wow.
Oh, go ahead, Donna.
Oh, it's more of a statement. But I am curious which school you work in Holyoke, as I live in Holyoke.
Oh, great. I'm at Morgan.
Oh, one of my kids went to Morgan. It's amazing. I'm so glad you're there. Thank you for what you're doing locally and what you've done around the world. I think one of the things that we find is kids are kids, and we need to support all the trauma that they're experiencing both locally and globally.
Wholeheartedly. Yeah, I totally am with you there.
And I just wanted to say, your daughter's adorable, by the way.
Oh, thank you. So she goes to school in Holyoke too. She's
that's
a
so
Mater Dolorosa.
So when you were visiting the camps, was it dangerous for you to be there?
Not the
How
camp.
safe was it?
Not the camps, but Western Sahara itself. I was tracked by police and then stopped at a certain point in 2013. And I still remember the police officer, he was like, ne pas no autorisé, which means you're not authorized to be here.
Mm.
The second time I was there, I was deported. I was like cornered into a room. I wasn't feeling well. I went to the hospital and I was cornered. All the Sahrawis that I was with were moved away from me. And so I was deported to Casablanca after that.
Wow.
Wow, that's scary.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's worse for the Sahrawis because as an international observer, you kind of know that they can't come after you. They can't get you because it would make headlines internationally. Whereas for Sahrawis, they can disappear, they can, experience abuse, and it doesn't make headlines.
Because of you were exposed to so much trauma in your life and you've seen so much, how do you support the youth that you work with so that you are feeling like that you are giving them what they need as much as you can?
Yeah, it's I'll say quite honestly, it can be challenging because children do come in with a lot of stress, especially I notice after the weekends. It's checking in with us. Sometimes you get children who are very scared of calling parents or foster parents because they're afraid of being hit at home. I've seen children diagnosed with PTSD who cut themselves while at school. And it's painful to see. And as teachers, we don't get a lot of training in trauma-informed teaching. We get training in like getting their test scores up. That's the main bulk of our professional kind of school year development days it's only around that, analyzing test scores and comparing to other schools in the district. So the way I try to address that is in my classroom. I try on most days to have like social emotional learning goal as well as an academic math goal. So I'll start out like, okay, let's look in our classmates for well-grounded confidence. What could be an example of that? Or I'll have them clap it out like confidence, and then how many syllables is that? And then at the end of class, I'll have them like give shout outs to each other for, I saw that she was raising her hand and she was participating and she took a risk. Like she didn't know the answer, but she took a risk and she tried anyway. So they'll give each other shout outs for like working hard in class, and sometimes not exactly related to the social emotional goal, but still like it creates more of a supportive environment. And then also recently, or on Wednesday, I went to the State House. There was a hearing there for the Thrive Act, which aims to create a more authentic and accurate way of us assessing students, rather than the MCAS as this high stakes like requirement to graduate from high school, which I believe harms a lot of students who don't have that privilege of always having the language and having access to everything you need to show what you know on tests. But also like I was there to advocate for that. Representative Duffy had invited me to speak there, and so I went to testify about the experience and how that also impacts our professional development as teachers. This kind of MCAS focus on the focus on testing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Nina. I understand that you also work with Girls Inc.
Yeah, I volunteered there. I am a registered volunteer. I volunteered once for Girls on the Run when Girls Inc. and a couple of my students were there too, did a 5K with Girls on the Run. And that was wonderful just because it's just girls coming together, seeing each other, and also role models in the community that are up there on stage, generating excitement and just running for a good cause.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from Nina?
Mary Ann has her hand up.
Very
Nina,
good.
could you stop sharing so we can see people?
Oh, I apologize. Yeah. Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic presentation. I'm just wondering, have you ever thought about writing a book, and not only about what you experienced, but how those experiences have shaped your teaching and other aspects of your life?
Awesome. Yeah, I've thought about it. It's finding the time, I think, to do it.
Mm.
Yeah, as a mother, first and foremost to her, and grad school
Mhm.
and everything, but sometime after Teach for America, possibly. Yeah. Thank you for the
Well, when you
encouragement suggestion.
well, yes, and when you do, please let us know, because I, for one, would be interested in reading it, and I'm sure that there are many people on this call that would feel the same way. So, yeah, please keep us up to date on that.
Thank you. And on my end, I would love to learn more about Zonta and all the wonderful work that you're doing as women to support girls and women. It's very inspiring, very necessary. So thank you.
Well, I think Mary could probably add you to
I probably
our
could.
email list. There's a segue for you, Mary.
And I think Karen has a question.
Oh, no, I do. I do. Yeah. Hey, first of all, I want to thank you so much. I'm deeply touched by what you shared with us. So thank you very much. And just as former educators, we're both former educators. I just want to thank you too for the work you do with kids. It's so important. So it's a tough career to take, a tough career path to take. So thank you for taking it, and thank you for the work you do, especially with the trauma informed kids. The things that you're doing with them in your classroom is just it's spectacular. So keep doing that work, and thank you.
She was a counselor. So
How did you, I'm curious for you, how did you bring that, how did you see it was necessary to support teachers in that as a counselor?
We actually used to have, we had an awesome principal, and I worked in Westfield, and so they actually had, they brought the social emotional goals into their classroom. All the teachers actually had to do that. That was one of our standards.
Yeah.
So we set up, I helped the teachers all set up spaces, which at first we talked about them being quiet spaces. Anyways, they eventually all had spaces in their classroom, and they did a lot of, they let their kids go in those spaces when they needed to just have a break.
Oh yeah, like a calm corner.
Like a calming corner. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there was all kinds of names that we named them, but every classroom had that. And we had awesome teachers in Westfield. In the
Right.
particular school I was in an elementary school. So
Great. Yeah, the standards are really great. Those are the ones I have on the wall. Yeah.
yeah, so thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Joshua, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Nina. I enjoyed that talk. I've spoken to you before about your experiences, but this was really in much greater detail. And so thank you for sharing with all of us. I did have a question about the experience of the Sahrawi in refugee camps, given that they were Bedouin who you described as being nomadic. It must have been especially
Sorry, my daughter. Go ahead. Given
yeah,
the experiences as Bedouins. Yeah.
it must have been a kind of like a very particular experience for former nomads than to be confined in a kind of a sedentary
Good point.
camp situation. And I wonder if there was a special kind of trauma that they experienced because of their previous lives, more kind of nomadic. I know that there's been a lot of sedentarization across the board, not just with refugee situations, but then also I wanted to ask you about the hopes of the young people in the camps, and what your hopes are for them.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about the shift in lifestyle from being very nomadic and traveling on camels and walking from place to place so frequently to being sedentary. I think that's been it's been very traumatic. And what people I think one way that people cope is through, there's a tea ceremony, their Sahrawi tea ceremony, in which every day you just picture this kind of wide expanse of desert, and then in the camp tents and houses, you'll have families just brewing tea, and it's a type of green tea, and it's just pouring it, and you know, it'll like the charcoal is like crackling the fire, and they'll just brew it, and then they sit together. It smells like green tea. And they'll sit together and they'll just talk about you know, politics. They'll talk about what's happening internationally. They'll talk about their community, about like things happening in the family, and recollecting stories, passing on history that way to each other. So that is a way I think that people cope with it. And it's really that tea ceremony. It's 3 cups of tea that you drink over like an hour. And one is, I think, soft as varying degrees of sugar. One is soft as life, I believe, and then one is bitter like death, and one is sweet like love. But that's a way that Sahrawis kind of cope with that sedentary lifestyle and are able to talk and express themselves with one another. And it just brings them together as families and as friends. And then as far as your other question about what my hopes are for the Sahrawi children, I think I really see education. So Miss Elizabeth Hart spoke about the Sustainable Development Goals, and I really see, you know, among the 17 of them, I really see education as being the one goal that kind of unlocks the rest, because when you have an educated community, so much can happen in terms of, you know, advocacy for medical care, human rights, the types of shared consciousness that emerges with education. I think that's my big hope, is that the UN continues to do its work with education. They've partnered with UNICEF for the camps, and also they've developed a program more recently around that supports trauma training for teachers and being more self-aware with kids that in this community, which clearly is traumatized. So their focus is really on emotional intelligence for teachers, and developing that in teachers so that they can better teach children. And so I think, yeah, I'm hoping that program continues to develop so that children will be able to, once they graduate from middle school, they'll be able to seek other opportunities, maybe Algeria, France, Spain, other places in the world, the US, and then just be a voice, talk about the Western Sahara, talk about the human rights, talk about, and somehow, you know, that kind of democratically make change for the better.
Thank you, Nina. I should have done this in the very beginning of our session today, and I apologize for that. But it is Indigenous Peoples Day, and the Zonta Club of Quabog Valley is located in Western Massachusetts, in the ancestral land of the Nonotuck people. It's also important to acknowledge the neighboring Indigenous nations who continue to be connected to this land. The Nipmuc and the Wampanoag in the east, the Mohegan and the Pequot in the south, the Mohegan in the west, and the Abenaki in the north. As Zontians, we recognize that climate change has negatively impacted this land, and we're working to educate ourselves and advocate for action that will mitigate future climate impacts, especially on women, children, and others who are most vulnerable. In that, I would like to close this session, and please stay on if you have some questions, but we respect your time. Thank you so much for Liz and for Nina and your fabulous presentations. It was very impactful for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Mary. Appreciate it. Nina, very nice to meet you.
Very nice.